Hello, and welcome to Dark Whisper. Are you ready to turn down the lights and prepare for a chill? Tonight we have a collection of terrifying short horror stories guaranteed to keep you up long after you've finished listening. Before we dive into the darkness, we'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Let us know in the comments below what city and country you're listening from. And if you love being scared, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our new weekly tales of terror. Now, without further ado, let's begin.
Today I want to share one of the most terrifying experiences I ever lived through when I was just starting out as a bus driver. My name is Jose Luis. I've been driving buses for over 20 years, and while I've seen many strange things on the road, nothing compares to what happened that night. A night that still clings to me to this day. It happened during one of my first trips, driving from Mexico City to Veracruz. It was past midnight and everything was calm until traffic came to a complete stop. Far ahead, there had been a massive crash. We weren't going anywhere. My bus ended up right next to an exit ramp. My coworker, who had been driving for years, told me to take it. He said it's longer, but right now it'll be much faster. I wasn't so sure. We weren't supposed to leave the official route, but he insisted. And since I was just a rookie, I listened. What I didn't know was that the road we were entering had a very dark reputation. As soon as we got on that alternate highway, I noticed how silent everything was. There were no cars, no lights, nothing. Just us, surrounded by emptiness. It felt like we were driving into a forgotten world. And then we saw them. Far ahead, moving between the trees, shapes began to appear. Figures, coming out of the brush. They looked like people, stepping toward the road. They were waving at us, signaling for us to stop, begging for help. My first instinct was to hit the brakes. But before I could, my coworker shouted at me, "Don't stop! Keep going! Whatever you do, do not stop!" I asked him why he was so scared. His answer chilled me to the bone. Because those are not living people. He said that road was known among drivers for all the souls who had died there in horrible accidents. Souls that, according to old stories, got trapped in that stretch of highway, forever asking for help. I wanted to believe he was just trying to scare me. But what happened next made me doubt everything. No matter how far we drove, the silhouettes stayed at the exact same distance. Always just ahead, always waving, always begging, as if they were walking right in front of the bus, matching our speed perfectly, as if we could never escape them. At that moment, one of the passengers, a woman from Veracruz, stood up and walked toward us. When she saw the figures ahead, she immediately crossed herself. Her voice was shaking as she asked why we had taken that cursed road. She said everyone knew the stories, and she warned us that if something happened to all of us, it would be our fault for ignoring the route. I was terrified. Terrified of the shadows, and terrified that she might report us to the company. But after more than an hour, we finally reached the end of that stretch of highway. And the instant we left it behind, the figures simply vanished. Gone. As if they had never been there at all. That night, I arrived home still shaking. I told my wife everything. She loves paranormal stories, but I couldn't stop thinking about what we saw, what we almost got too close to. The passenger never filed a complaint, but from that day on, I made myself a promise. I will never, ever take that road again.
My name is Gilberto Molina, and for many years I worked as a bus driver here in Mexico. I drove mostly through the southern part of the country. I won't mention the companies I worked for, because in the end, that's not what matters in this story. When you spend your life driving through dark highways at night, you experience many things. But what I'm about to tell you didn't happen on the road. It happened inside the bus. We were heading back to the city where the trip had started. There were no passengers left, just my coworker and me. Our shift was over, and the night was especially dark. We were talking about random things when suddenly we heard loud banging noises. My coworker and I looked at each other confused and fell silent. The banging came again, stronger this time. And worse, we could feel it. The sound was coming from the lower part of the bus. My coworker went to check the passenger seats, but no one was there. From the back, he said the noises were even louder, and he was sure they were coming from the luggage compartment. But that compartment was completely empty. We pulled over on the side of the highway to check what was causing the noise. But the moment we opened the luggage compartment, the banging stopped. As expected, there was nothing inside. Not in the luggage area, not in the small cabin where drivers sleep during long trips. Nothing. The bus was still running, but all the noise had vanished. So we got back in and continued the drive. Hours later, my coworker told me that when he tried to sleep, he felt something touch his hair. He even woke up suddenly because someone or something pulled the blanket he was using. At first, he thought he was dreaming or that the bus had shifted, but after those noises, he wasn't so sure anymore. We continued working with that bus for several more trips, and then the passengers started complaining. Some said they heard screams, whispers, or moaning coming from the luggage compartment. Others came to us terrified, insisting that someone was trapped down there and begging us to stop the bus. My coworker and I had to reassure them that everything was fine, even though we ourselves were beginning to doubt it. It got so bad that we eventually had to request a different bus. The noises, the voices, the knocks, the number of reports was overwhelming. After a few weeks, the company finally gave us another unit. We never learned exactly what was haunting that bus, but among the drivers, there was a rumor. Years ago, two young, undocumented men had hidden inside the luggage compartment of a bus from that same company, trying to travel to another state without identification. But at a checkpoint, an armed group found them, took their lives, and forced the drivers to carry their bodies in the compartment. Yes, things like that do happen on Mexican highways. And we were almost certain that our bus was the one that had transported those bodies. Maybe that's why their spirits never left. What do you think? Thanks for listening.
Good evening. My name is Ramon Aguirre, and what I'm about to tell you happened several years ago on a trip to Taxco. I was traveling by bus, though I'd rather not mention the company. I always traveled at night because the buses were quieter and usually almost empty. I remember boarding around 8 o'clock in the evening. There were very few passengers, so I got an empty seat to myself. I walked all the way to the back, got comfortable, and everything seemed normal. Soon I fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how much time passed, but it was already early morning when the bus came to a sudden stop. I looked out the window and saw sirens flashing everywhere. It looked like there had been an accident. Police officers were directing traffic, and we were completely stopped. Out of nowhere, and without understanding how, a man boarded the bus. I didn't see who opened the door or why they let him in, because that model of bus had a door that blocked the view of the driver's area. All I saw was the man walking down the aisle and taking a seat right next to me, even though there were many empty seats available. The bus eventually began moving again, leaving the traffic jam behind. We were driving through a lonely, dark stretch of road, surrounded by mountains, when suddenly the man started crying. Not softly, he was sobbing uncontrollably. I felt incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't want to ask him anything, but it felt rude not to. So I quietly said, "Are you all right?" He didn't answer. He didn't even look at me. I didn't ask again, but the tension made it impossible to sleep. His clothing looked worn, torn, like he'd been through something horrible. I considered changing seats several times, but I was worried he'd think it was because of him, which honestly it was. But his constant crying was unbearable. So eventually I grabbed my things and told him, "Excuse me." I walked toward front and sat down. At that moment, one of the two bus drivers came down the aisle, heading to the restroom. Seeing me moving with my luggage, he asked, "Is everything okay? Why did you change seats?" I quietly explained about the man who had boarded earlier and asked the driver to check on him because he hadn't stopped crying since he got on. The driver looked completely confused, almost like I was speaking nonsense. "What man?" he asked. "No one has boarded since we left the station." I told him, surprised, "The man who got on when we were stopped because of the accident, less than an hour ago." He shook his head. "We didn't let anyone on. It's strictly forbidden to pick up passengers on the road, and no one approached us or asked to get on." I told him to follow me. We walked to the back of the bus, but the man was gone. The seat was empty. We checked the restroom, even the luggage compartments. Nothing. The driver told me to calm down, that maybe I had dreamed it. That irritated me because I knew what I had seen, but I had no proof. I returned to my seat, uneasy and confused. A few minutes later, the driver came out of the restroom and approached me again. "Do you remember what the man was wearing?" he asked. I nodded. A red shirt, jeans, worn and torn clothes. His face turned pale. His eyes widened. "I can't believe it," he muttered. What is it?" I asked. And he replied, "In that accident we were stopped for, we saw the body of a man lying on the pavement. He caused the crash. He must have gotten out of his car before he died, and he was wearing a red shirt and jeans." The exact same clothes as the man who sat next to me. A chill ran through my entire body. The driver asked me not to tell any other passengers so they wouldn't panic. Then he walked away, probably to tell the other driver. For the rest of the trip, I was terrified. I didn't sleep at all. I kept looking around the bus, afraid that the man would appear again. That man a restless soul, crying in despair. Since that night, I never travel at night anymore. That experience marked me for life. And one thing is certain, I never want to see a ghost again. I hope you enjoyed my story. Good night, everyone.
Hello, Dark Whisper. My name is Estefania, and today I want to share an experience that, even though it fills me with anxiety every time I tell it, I feel the need to finally get it off my chest. It's a heavy story, and it's also paranormal. To this day, I don't know if what I experienced was good or bad. This happened in 2015. At that time, I was the mother of 2 young children, 6 and 8 years old. Their father lived 3 hours away, and since we had recently separated, we had agreed that he would take them during vacations. He always picked them up and then returned them. But that time, he called me to say he had an emergency and couldn't take them. He asked if I could go pick them up by bus and he would pay for the tickets. I agreed without thinking too much about it. I didn't want to leave my children there any longer. I left on Saturday night because I had to return with them on Sunday. Classes were starting on Monday. The bus left exactly at midnight. I was nervous. The roads in that area are dangerous, full of sharp curves, and I wasn't used to traveling alone at night. I don't know if it was that or if something inside me just sensed that tragedy was coming. But from the moment the bus started, I felt a fear in my chest that I couldn't explain. And then, it happened. On one of the most dangerous curves, a place where many accidents had already happened, the driver lost control. Everything happened in seconds. I felt the impact, the screams, the metal bending. The bus tipped over. I was wearing my seatbelt, which almost no one does on buses, and that simple decision made me one of the few survivors. The vehicle caught fire. Smoke filled everything. My eyes burned and I could barely breathe. I tried to get out, but I was dazed, weak, powerless. I don't know if it was from the impact or the smoke, but my body just wouldn't respond. I managed to crawl to a broken window, but I couldn't get out on my own. No one was helping us yet. There were no lights, no voices, just fire and silence. I thought I was going to die there. I screamed for help, but no one answered. The heat was unbearable. And then, something happened that changed my life forever. I swear to my life, I felt 2 hands grab my arms and pull me forcibly out of the bus, throwing me onto the ground outside. I froze. I got up immediately and looked around to see who had saved me. But there was absolutely no one there. The place was completely empty. No car, no person, nothing. I ran away from the bus because I feared it would explode. Eternal seconds passed until finally a car stopped to help me. I was shaking, crying, and the only thing I kept saying was, "Where are they? Where are the people who pulled me out?" But they just looked at me confused. There was no one else, only me. When the ambulances and firefighters arrived, there was nothing left to do. All the other passengers had lost their lives. I couldn't believe I had survived and that there was no one to thank for saving me. To this day, I don't know who or what pulled me out of the bus.
My family believes it might have been the spirit of someone who had died in that same spot before, someone who didn't want me to meet the same fate. And although it sounds crazy, I have no other explanation. All I know is that this story is real. I didn't imagine it. It wasn't a hallucination. Something or someone saved my life that night. And because of that, today I can be here sharing my story. I'd love to know what you think. What do you believe that presence was that pulled me out of the bus?
Hello. My name is Ramiro Acuña, and I'm from Tamaulipas, Mexico. Today, I want to share a story that I consider entirely paranormal. I've always been interested in stories of terror and mystery, but until that year, I had never experienced something like this myself. And I must admit, after that night, I was never the same. It's something I still struggle to come to terms with, especially because of how delicate the subject is. It all happened on a cold December night. I was traveling for the Christmas holidays to my family's ranch, where almost all of my relatives live. I work in the city, about 2 hours away from the ranch. That night, I bought a bus ticket for midnight because I finished work at 10. I worked as a waiter, so I still had to get home, pack my bag, and shower before leaving. We left the bus station and entered the highway, which is already quite intimidating at night, completely dark. For those familiar with the area, you know how tense it is to travel these roads at night, especially because of crime. I wasn't exactly afraid, but you can't help feeling nervous in situations like this. Still, my desire to see my family outweighed any fear. We were about halfway there. There were very few people on the bus, maybe 8 at most. I never fall asleep during the ride. The journey is short, and with all the nerves, I prefer to put on my headphones and look out the window, even though you can see almost nothing. Suddenly, I felt the bus slowing down, in the middle of the highway, where there was nothing. I leaned forward to see if there was a security checkpoint or if someone had stopped us, but I saw nothing. Some passengers woke up and approached the windows to see what was happening. I was near the front, and that's when I saw them. 4 people, 3 young men and a woman, standing outside the bus door, begging the driver to let them in. What struck me most was their clothing, light, torn, and dirty. But what was even more shocking was the cold. It was barely 3 degrees Celsius, and yet they wore shorts and summer clothes, as if the freezing temperature didn't affect them. I watched them closely as the driver slowly started moving. They walked alongside the bus, pressed against the door, still insisting to get on. Then, over the radio, the driver told us to close the windows and not to look outside. And just like that, they disappeared. They simply vanished into the darkness. He continued the trip normally until our destination, but I couldn't let the question go. When everyone got off, I stayed back and asked the driver what had happened at that remote spot and who those people were. At first, he didn't want to answer, but I insisted. Finally, he told me something that left me stunned. Other drivers had warned him that 4 migrants who had been murdered by organized crime in that very area in a brutal way appeared there. He had stopped because he thought they were people who really needed help. But then, remembering the warnings from his colleagues, he decided to move on, leaving them behind. He asked me not to tell anyone. At first, I found it hard to believe, but later, after researching online, I discovered it was true. I recognized the woman in the photo. It was the same one I had seen with the 3 men, asking to get on the bus. I can't recall the faces of the men clearly, but I remember her vividly. It's a very sad story, and I pray they found their way to eternal rest, and that they are no longer trapped in that remote spot, suffering for eternity.
I remember that terrifying night very clearly, and I will never forget it.
My name is Carla, and this happened to me more than 10 years ago. But even now, I still get chills every time I remember what we went through that night. I was a passenger on a bus, traveling through a mountain highway in Mexico. The bus was almost completely full. It was around 9 at night. A movie the driver had put on had just finished, and he turned off the small screens, leaving only music playing. Back then, it was very common for buses to switch to music once the movies ended. Everything was completely normal, until around 11 at night, when we were heading deeper into the mountains. Some passengers had already fallen asleep, but I was awake because I had my 4-year-old son with me, and I couldn't let myself drift off. The music played softly while I stared into the pitch-black darkness outside. Then, suddenly, a loud noise blasted through the speakers, the kind of harsh interference sound that makes you jump out of your seat. It was so loud that many passengers woke up, including my son. And then, it started. A woman's voice, screaming, begging for help. Her cries were desperate, horrific, filled with a kind of pain and terror that didn't sound like a recording, but like someone truly living their final moments. There were unintelligible words mixed with her sobbing, almost like something out of a horror movie, but we instantly knew this wasn't a movie. This was real. In her desperation, she managed to say her location, a specific kilometer marker in that same mountain region. And from the little we could understand, she said she had been attacked by an armed group while she was driving her trailer. The driver panicked. He kept apologizing and trying to lower the volume, but he couldn't. The sound wouldn't stop. The woman continued screaming, crying, pleading, until she ended with one chilling sentence. "Don't come through here." And just like that, the music returned, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Everyone on the bus was terrified. Even though we weren't heading toward that specific stretch of the highway, fear wrapped around all of us like ice. My 4-year-old son broke into tears, shaking uncontrollably. It took everything in me to calm him down. The driver kept telling us to remain calm, that nothing was going to happen. But fear doesn't listen to logic, not after hearing something like that. A few minutes later, we arrived at a bus terminal where some passengers were getting off and others would board. Many of us took the chance to go to the restroom, but I stayed behind. I needed to talk to the driver. I needed answers. I approached him trembling and told him I had my son with me, and those screams, those agonizing cries, I couldn't get them out of my head. He sighed and told me he'd explain the truth so I would calm down. And then he told me something I will never forget. He said this wasn't the first time it had happened. Other drivers had heard the exact same thing, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months. He explained that a few years earlier, a female trucker driver had been intercepted by a criminal group at that exact kilometer. They mistook her for someone else, an enemy, and they made her disappear. Only her trailer was ever found. Her body was never recovered. And not long after that, all of this started happening. Without warning, the radio would get interference, and her voice would break through. Her screams, her agony, her warning. According to him, it was her spirit,
still trapped, still trying to alert anyone who passed through that cursed stretch of road. Listening to that made me feel deeply sad, but the fear didn't leave me. It only grew stronger. Because I realized I hadn't just heard a recording. I had heard a woman who was no longer alive. And hearing her in the middle of the mountains, in the darkness, surrounded by nothing but silence, it was one of the most traumatic moments of my life. Even now, when I think about her screams, the pain, the fear, the desperation in her voice, I still get chills. It's something I wouldn't wish for anyone to ever experience.
My name is Rene Lopez, and I've worked for many years as a driver for a transportation company. People always ask me the same question. Have you ever seen anything paranormal on the road, especially when you're driving alone at night? And the truth is, yes. On the highways of Mexico, when you travel in the darkness, you're exposed to many things, some paranormal and some far worse. But what happened on this trip was something different, something I will never forget. It all started the day my supervisor told me I'd been assigned to drive a school bus for a small group of students heading on a 9-hour excursion. I agreed happily. So that afternoon, I arrived early at the school, around 6 p.m., to handle paperwork and routine checks before departure. When I walked out of the office and headed to the bus to turn on the air conditioning, I noticed something strange. A girl was already sitting inside, pressed against the window. This didn't make sense. I had left the bus completely locked, and inside it was boiling hot. No air conditioning, heat trapped from the sun. No student should have been inside. I opened the door and politely told her she needed to wait outside until the teachers allowed everyone to board. But she didn't respond. She just stared at me in complete silence. Not wanting to be harsh, I went to get one of the teachers. She came angrily, ready to scold whoever was disobeying. But when we climbed onto the bus together, there was no one there. The teacher checked the bathroom, empty. We assumed the girl had slipped out quickly when she saw us coming. We didn't give it much thought, at least not yet. Departure time arrived. Students lined up with their permission slips, and the teachers verified every name. But here's what bothered me. I never saw that girl get on the bus, and yet the teacher insisted everyone was accounted for. We were running late, so I let it go and started the journey. Hours later, around midnight, everyone was asleep. I was driving through the dark highway, listening to the radio, until suddenly, 2 girls from the back ran to the front, upset and scared. They said someone had pulled their blankets off them several times while they slept. One of the teachers went to check, but all the other students were still asleep. No one admitted to doing anything. An hour later, the same girls came running again, this time terrified. Someone had pulled their hair. They said they woke up instantly and saw no one near them, not even in the bathroom. The teachers tried to calm them, but there were no available seats to move them, except for one single empty seat halfway down the bus. Soon after, we stopped at a gas station with a restaurant and bathrooms. All the students got off to stretch their legs. I used the chance to go to the restroom too. But when I returned, there she was again, the same girl I had seen before departure, sitting in the only empty seat on the bus. This time, I was completely sure I hadn't seen her board. I climbed the steps quickly to talk to her, but the moment I stepped inside, she vanished. Gone. Not a sound, not a movement. My hands went cold. Something was very wrong. We continued the journey. Late into the night, past 3 a.m., everyone fell asleep again, and then I saw her again, walking slowly down the aisle towards the back of the bus. I called out to her, loudly, but a teacher woke up and asked who I was talking to. When she looked, the aisle was empty. That's when I finally told her everything from the very beginning. The teacher listened in complete silence, her face growing paler with each detail. Then she unlocked her phone, opened a photograph, and asked me, was it her? I froze. It was the same girl, the same face I had seen on the bus multiple times. The teacher covered her mouth in shock and then told me the truth. The girl's name was Renata. She had been part of that same class, excited about this very trip. Her parents had signed everything. She had paid for the excursion. But just a few weeks before, she had been hit by a car while crossing the street. She died instantly. The school had decided not to cancel the trip since everything was already paid, but the students had been heartbroken. And the girls from the back, the ones whose blankets were pulled and whose hair was tugged, had bullied Renata when she was alive. Every detail clicked into place. Every sighting, every strange incident, every empty seat she appeared in. The teacher stayed awake the rest of the night praying with a rosary for Renata's soul. And from that moment on, nothing else happened. On the return trip, just before boarding, one boy suddenly shouted a curse, claiming he had seen Renata sitting in the same seat. Everyone laughed at him, thinking he just wanted attention. But the teacher and I looked at each other, because we knew the truth. I never saw Renata again after that day, but I will never forget her. Her sadness, her silence, and her longing to join the trip she had dreamed of, even after death.
My name is Fernando, and today I want to share an experience that happened to me, my mother, and several other passengers traveling with us on a long-distance bus. It's something I will never forget. Every vacation, my mother and I would travel overnight from Monterrey to Mexico City to visit my older sister. It was a long and exhausting trip, so we always preferred to ride at night. That way we could sleep through most of the journey. It was during one of those trips, deep into the early morning hours, when everything happened. My mother was asleep beside me, and I was watching a movie on my phone. The bus was packed, and we were sitting almost at the very back. I checked the time. It was just about 3 a.m., so I removed my headphones, turned off my screen, and decided to try and sleep a little. I didn't want to arrive at my sister's house completely exhausted. But just as I was closing my eyes, a scream tore through the silence. A scream so loud, so raw and horrifying that it woke up everyone around us, including my mother. It was unmistakably the scream of a woman, and it came directly from the bus restroom behind us. My mother, pale and startled, asked me what that had been. I told her I didn't know. Everyone was turning toward the back and whispering the same question. A man sitting beside us asked if he had seen anyone go to the restroom. He swore he had been awake the whole time, and nobody had passed by. The last 2 seats at the very back were completely empty. I told him I hadn't noticed anything either, but that we needed to tell the driver. Someone might be inside that restroom needing help. No one else got up, so I decided to go. But before I could even reach the aisle, we heard it again. The woman's voice. This time, she was crying. I walked toward the restroom as my mother begged me not to go, but I thought a woman might be in trouble. I knocked on the door several times. No answer. The lock indicator showed it wasn't locked, but I didn't want to just open it and violate someone's privacy. I kept knocking, asking if anyone needed help. Silence. Total silence. The man beside us went to call the driver, and moments later, both of them returned to the back of the bus. What struck me was the expression on the driver's face. Annoyance, or maybe resignation, as if this wasn't the first time. Without knocking, without asking, he opened the door. And inside, there was no one. Absolutely no one. We were stunned. All of us in the back had clearly heard the scream and the sobbing coming from that restroom. The man beside me and I insisted, swearing on our lives, that someone had been in there. It was then that the driver leaned in and spoke quietly so no one else could hear. He told us the truth. Back in 2012, something terrible had happened on that very bus. He hadn't experienced it himself, but a coworker had. One night, while the bus was heading south, several armed trucks blocked the road and forced the driver to stop. He told the passengers to stay calm. Those men were going to board the bus. Everyone remained in their seats, except for one young woman. She panicked and ran into the restroom, locking herself inside. The armed men boarded the bus, shouting questions and inspecting the passengers. When one of them noticed the locked restroom door, they began pounding on it violently, cursing, threatening to kill everyone if the person inside didn't come out immediately. The woman had no choice. She opened the door, crying and begging them not to hurt her. But it didn't matter. Right there, inside that tiny restroom, they took her life. Passengers screamed and cried as her body was dragged out. The men left, taking her with them, and her body was never found. Ever since then, several drivers had reported strange things. Cries, screams, knocking, always coming from the restroom, always during nighttime trips. When the driver finished telling us this, my mother and I were frozen. He simply asked us if we heard anything again, we should stay calm or pray until it passed. The man next to us tried to laugh it off, insisting he didn't believe in ghosts, but his shaking hands said otherwise. None of us could deny what we had heard. I didn't sleep for the rest of the trip. I kept feeling as if someone was standing behind me, watching me from the darkness. I don't know if it was just fear or something real. Even when we finally arrived in Mexico City, the feeling didn't leave me. All I could think about was the return trip. The odds of getting on the same bus were small, but the fear stayed with me. What happened to that poor woman was a true tragedy. My mother still prays for her soul to this day, hoping she can finally find peace. And now I believe what many people say. You don't believe in these things until they happen to you.
My name is Fernando, and this happened years ago, back when I was still in high school. Our school organized a field trip from San Luis Potosí to the city of Guanajuato. We were traveling in a rented bus, about 20 students, 2 teachers, and the driver. We left at around 9 at night, and darkness had already swallowed the road. Most of us were still awake, talking, laughing, watching movies, but by the time it was close to 1 in the morning, some classmates and even the teachers had already fallen asleep. Only a few friends and I were still awake when the bus turned onto a winding road through the mountains. I was staring out the window, admiring the silhouette of the Sierra. It looked massive, towering over us in the darkness. And then we felt the entire bus shake violently. It was so sudden that we thought a tire had exploded. The loud bang made it obvious something had gone wrong. A couple of teachers and a few students woke up, confused. We looked outside and saw the driver and the teachers checking the rear tire, trying to take it off to replace it. That's when one of my friends whispered, "Come here, what is that out there between the trees?" We all rushed to the window, and what we saw, we will never forget. Out there, in the darkness of the mountain, were children, small children, maybe 6 years old, holding hands, spinning in a circle, as if they were playing. We couldn't count them exactly, but there were around 6 or 7, boys and girls. My stomach dropped. There was no way children should be out there alone at that hour in the middle of the mountains. And deep down, we all knew they were not normal children. Not anymore. One of my friends began waking up the rest of the group so they could see. Within seconds, everyone was pressed against the windows. Some were terrified, others stunned, and a few, too excited to understand the danger, laughed nervously. A girl knocked on the window to get the teacher's attention. When they looked and saw the children, the teacher's face went pale. He told us, "Nobody gets off the bus. Stay inside. I'll be right back." He ran outside toward the driver and the other teacher, probably to tell them what we were seeing. But the noise he made, it was enough. The children in the distance suddenly stopped spinning and turned towards us. Their eyes were glowing white, so bright it looked unnatural, sinister. A classmate screamed, "They're getting closer!" We all started banging on the windows, shouting for the teachers and driver to get inside the bus, but they were still trying to fix the tire. One of the teachers peeked from behind the bus and froze when he saw them approaching, still holding hands, still staring at us with those glowing, horrifying eyes. Finally, the tire was changed. Everyone rushed inside, slammed the doors shut, and the driver started the engine. We watched through the windows as those things, those not children, kept coming closer and closer. But we drove off just in time. My friends and I hurried to the front to talk to the driver and teachers. We were shaking, trying to make sense of what we had seen. That's when the driver said something that chilled us even more. He told us he believed they were the children from the accident in the 90s. The teacher asked, "What accident?" And the driver told us everything. Years ago, a school bus had fallen off the mountainside at that exact kilometer. Several children had died. Locals claimed cars would mysteriously break down there at night. Flat tires, engines that suddenly shut off, always at the same spot. And anyone unlucky enough to be stranded there after dark reported seeing children stepping out from between the trees. He said a couple once disappeared there. 2 only their abandoned car was found. No trace of them ever again. He admitted he never believed the stories. Not until that night. Not until he saw what we all saw. We were lucky that the tire was fixed in time, lucky that we managed to drive away before those creatures reached us. Whatever those things were, they weren't innocent souls trapped in this world. Something darker, something malevolent had taken the place of those children. On the way back, we took a different route, and I have never, ever gone through that mountain road again.
My name is Hernan Dominguez, and this happened years ago, back when I was still in high school. I was traveling with my mother from Zacatecas to Aguascalientes to visit my grandmother. We always preferred to travel at night. We liked to arrive during the day. That night was no different. The trip was going smoothly. Everything seemed normal. I was watching a movie on the bus screens while most people were asleep. It was past midnight. Then, suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes. Everyone was thrown forward by the inertia, but thankfully, no one was seriously hurt. Almost everyone woke up immediately, confused. I looked outside and realized we were in the middle of nowhere. Complete darkness surrounded us. Only the forest, silent and ominous. And then we heard it. The sound of desperate pounding on the bus doors. Screams, a woman's voice crying and pleading. The driver shouted, "I can't open it!" Everyone was leaning out of the windows, trying to see what was happening. I was near the door, and I could see her, this woman, crying uncontrollably, hammering on the door, begging the driver to let her in. The bus began moving slowly. The driver was careful. He didn't want to run her over. Then, I saw something coming out of the darkness. It ran faster than any human could. It grabbed the woman by the neck and disappeared into the trees. Both of them vanished into the darkness and the branches. I couldn't understand it. Was it an animal? A person? Some kind of humanoid creature? Everything happened so fast that no one could make sense of it. The driver braked again, clearly in shock. Many of us were terrified, asking him what had just happened. He started the bus slowly, keeping a distance, and told us over the intercom that he would report it to the authorities. We reached our destination safely. But we never learned what happened to that woman, or what exactly had taken her. That night haunted me for a long time. And to be honest, I don't think she survived. I can only hope she did.
My name is Oscar, and this happened to a group of passengers on a bus traveling from Guerrero to Mexico City in the early 2000s. It was around 9 p.m. when we departed. The bus was fairly full, and I took a seat near the front, by the window. We started our journey calmly, heading to see my parents, whom I hadn't visited for many months. As we drove deeper into the night, something happened that none of us could have expected. Suddenly, the bus shook violently. I was asleep, and the sudden movement jolted me awake, just like it did for many others. The driver managed to stop the bus safely, avoiding a potential tragedy, and we ended up on the side of the road, dangerously close to the forest. The driver got out to inspect one of the tires. Most of us stayed seated, anxious and annoyed that our journey would be delayed. I peeked out the window, watching him. The darkness of the night and the overgrown grass made everything look ominous. Then, in an instant, something unimaginable happened. Out of nowhere, a creature, something I cannot explain, grabbed the driver by the calf. In one swift motion, it pulled him into the forest, dragging him out of sight. Passengers screamed. Women shouted in terror. Everyone pressed to the windows trying to see what had just happened. I caught a brief glimpse. A hand, human-like, but covered in thick hair, like some kind of animal. 5 men, including myself, quickly got off the bus to help. We only had one small flashlight. We searched carefully, moving through the grass and calling for the driver, but there was no response, no sign of him. Fear made us stop. We couldn't go further into the forest. All we could do was return to the bus and wait for help. The night dragged on. The tension was unbearable. Every passenger felt vulnerable, trapped in that dark, isolated place where something had snatched our driver without a trace. After about 2 hours, emergency vehicles arrived. We were transferred to another bus, and the authorities began searching for the driver. But he was never found. All that remained was one of his shoes, later confirmed by his wife. Even though the area was thoroughly searched by police and dogs, there was no trace of him. What we had witnessed was terrifying and inexplicable. I told an officer what I saw, but from his expression, I knew he didn't believe me. That night taught me a lesson. Never venture into the forest alone, especially at night. You never know what might be lurking in the darkness. This story is told with respect for the family of the man who was taken by something unknown.